Seriously, Rachel, I don't know what you were thinking. Katherine Blackwell's voice sliced through Miller's diner, sharp enough to make heads turn. Her Giorgio Armani blazer screamed corporate power against the worn vinyl booths. A carpenter? From a small town? This is supposed to be a suitable match for the CEO of Cascade Hotels. Alex Crawford sat motionless across from her, work-roughened hands wrapped around a cooling coffee cup. Paint streaked his fingernails. Sawdust clung to his flannel shirt. He stared out the window as if he belonged somewhere else entirely. Kate's manicured finger jabbed at her phone screen. Look at him, flannel shirt, paint under his nails. He probably hasn't left this town in years. Then the screaming erupted from the kitchen. Smoke poured through the air like black silk. Customers scrambled toward the exit, chairs scraping, voices rising in panic. But Alex Crawford didn't run. Instead, something shifted in his eyes, something Kate had never seen in any boardroom. What she didn't know about the quiet man she'd just humiliated was about to save her life. While chaos erupted around them, Alex moved against the tide of fleeing customers. His worn boots found steady ground on the slick linoleum as he pushed towards the source of danger. Kate watched in stunned silence as the man she'd dismissed moments ago walked directly into the billowing smoke. "What are you doing?" she called after him, her voice cracking with disbelief. The acrid smell of burning gas filled her nostrils, making her eyes water. Through the haze, she glimpsed Alex's silhouette disappearing into the kitchen. The head cook stumbled out, his white apron singed black. "The gas line's busted!" He shouted over the crackling flames. "I can't reach the main valve, it's stuck!" His hands shook as he pointed toward the back of the restaurant. Kate felt her chest tighten. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not today. Not when she had the most important meeting of her career waiting in Portland. But the flames didn't care about her schedule. Alex emerged from the smoke, carrying a toolbox that seemed to appear from nowhere. His movements were deliberate, calculated, nothing like the hesitant carpenter she'd assumed him to be. "Where's the basement access?" he asked the cook, his voice cutting through the panic with startling authority. The cook pointed to a door marked "Employees Only" with a trembling finger. Without hesitation, Alex disappeared again, leaving Kate standing frozen in the dining room. Mrs. Martinez, an elderly woman with a walker, struggled near the back booth. Her arthritis-gnarled hands gripped the metal frame as she tried to stand. The other customers had fled, abandoning her to navigate the chaos alone. Kate looked towards the kitchen, then back at the old woman. Her Louboutin heels clicked against the floor as she made a choice that surprised even herself. "Let me help you," she said, wrapping her arm around Mrs. Martinez's frail shoulders. The basement door slammed shut behind Alex as Kate guided the elderly woman toward safety. Through the floorboards, she could hear the sound of metal on metal tools working with urgent precision. The flames in the kitchen had grown higher, licking at the ceiling tiles with hungry orange tongues. Mrs. Martinez moved slowly, each step a deliberate effort. "Thank you, dear," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "That young man who went down there, he's Captain Morris's friend from the fire department." Kate's head snapped up. "Fire department?" The pieces clicked together with uncomfortable clarity. Alex hadn't hesitated because he was reckless. He'd moved toward danger because he knew exactly what he was doing. A sharp metallic click echoed from below, followed by the gradual hiss of escaping gas growing quieter. The flames in the kitchen began to shrink, their violent dance slowing to a manageable flicker. Within minutes, Alex reappeared, his face streaked with soot, but his eyes clear and focused. Captain Morris arrived with his crew, just as Alex finished extinguishing the last of the flames with the restaurant's fire suppressor system. The older man stepped out of the fire truck, surveying the scene with experienced eyes. "Alex Crawford," he said, a mixture of pride and resignation in his voice. "I told you once a firefighter, always a firefighter." Kate watched the exchange, her earlier assumptions crumbling like ash. This wasn't the first time Alex had faced down flames. This wasn't even close to the most dangerous situation he'd handled. 12 years on the force," Captain Morris continued, clapping Alex on the shoulder. "One of the best we ever had." Alex wiped his hands on a towel, avoiding Kate's stare. The restaurant fell silent, except for the gentle hum of the ventilation system, clearing the last of the smoke. Kate stood among the empty tables, her carefully constructed image of the afternoon shattered. The man she'd publicly humiliated had just saved everyone in the building, including her, and he'd done it without a word of complaint or a moment's hesitation. That evening, Kate sat in her room at Pine Valley Lodge, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her Armani blazer hung on the chair, wrinkled and smelling of smoke. She'd planned to drive back to Portland that night, but her Audi refused to start. The fire's heat and smoke had apparently damaged the electrical system. The nearest garage was 50 miles away in Bend, and with the storm warnings forecasting a major weather front moving through the mountains, no one was willing to make the trip until conditions improved. She pulled up the weather app on her phone. A massive storm system was approaching from the Pacific, expected to hit the mountain region by dawn. The screen showed red warning zones and wind advisories that made her stomach clench with anxiety. Her meeting with the investors was scheduled for 10 a.m. Missing it could mean losing the expansion deal she'd spent 3 years developing. Everything she'd worked for hung in the balance of mountain weather and a car that wouldn't turn over. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw Alex standing in the hallway, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. He'd cleaned up since the fire, trading his smoke-stained flannel for a simple grey sweater that made his eyes look darker. "I heard about your car trouble," he said when she opened the door. His voice carried the same quiet authority she'd witnessed during the fire. "Mrs. Hartwell mentioned you needed to get to Portland before the storm hits." Kate studied his face, searching for traces of mockery or resentment. She found neither. "I can pay you," she said quickly. $500 to drive me to the city before the weather gets bad." Alex shook his head, the gesture gentle but firm. "It's not about money," he replied. "That mountain road's dangerous in good weather, with a storm coming." He trailed off, letting the implications hang in the air between them. The silence stretched until Kate realized she was holding her breath. "I understand if you don't want to help," she said, the words coming out smaller than she intended. "After what I said at the restaurant." Alex's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Perhaps understanding, maybe forgiveness. "I'll take you," he said finally. "But we leave at dawn, before the worst of it hits. And if conditions get bad, we turn back. No discussion." Kate nodded, relief flooding through her chest. She didn't deserve his help, but she was grateful beyond words that he was offering it anyway. The next morning arrived grey and ominous, with heavy clouds pressing down on the mountain peaks like a thick blanket. Alex's pickup truck idled outside the lodge, its engine creating small puffs of white vapor in the cold air. Kate climbed into the passenger seat, her usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. The truck's interior smelled of sawdust and coffee, with a subtle hint of the smoke that still clung to Alex's jacket. He'd loaded extra supplies in the back emergency kit, blankets, water, and tools that suggested he took mountain driving seriously. They drove in tense silence as the road began to climb toward Mason Ridge. The pavement was still dry, but dark clouds gathered overhead like storm clouds in a Western movie. Kate gripped the door handle as the truck navigated switchbacks that dropped off into deep valleys. Her phone showed 3 bars of service, then 2, then 1. "How often do you drive this route?" she asked, partly to break the tension and partly because she genuinely wanted to know. "Not often anymore," Alex replied, his eyes never leaving the road. "Used to come up here for rescue calls when I was with the department." The first raindrops hit the windshield just as they reached the highest point of the pass. What started as a gentle patter quickly became a steady drumming, then a torrential downpour that reduced visibility to almost nothing. Alex slowed the truck to a crawl, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Through the rain-streaked windows, Kate could barely make out the guardrails that stood between them and 1,000-foot drops. "Maybe we should turn back," she said, though the words felt like surrender. Her career, her future, everything she'd worked for was waiting in Portland. "Can't," Alex replied grimly, pointing ahead through the windshield. "Look." Kate followed his gaze and felt her heart sink. A massive pine tree had fallen across the road behind them, its trunk thick enough to block both lanes completely. They were trapped on the mountain pass with nowhere to go but forward. The truck's engine coughed once, twice, then began to sputter with concerning irregularity. Alex guided them to a small pull-out area and turned off the ignition. In the sudden silence, the rain sounded like bullets against the metal roof. Alex checked the fuel gauge and cursed under his breath. The needle sat firmly on empty, though Kate was certain it had shown at least a quarter tank when they left the lodge. "The fuel line must have a leak," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Probably damaged in yesterday's fire. The heat could have warped the connections." Kate stared at him, the full scope of their situation finally sinking in. They were stranded on a mountain pass with no fuel, no way back, and no way forward. The storm was getting stronger, and her phone showed no signal bars at all. "How far to the nearest town?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. Alex studied the landscape through the rain-blurred windows. 15 miles back to Ridgemont," he said, 25 miles ahead to the next settlement. Both distances seemed impossible in the current weather. The rain was coming down so hard now that Kate could barely see the road 10 feet away. Alex reached behind the seat and pulled out a weathered canvas bag. "Emergency supplies," he explained. "Water, energy bars, emergency blankets, first aid kit. If we're careful, we can make it through the night." Kate watched him work with the same methodical precision she'd seen during the fire. He pulled out a tarp from the truck bed and rigged it between 2 trees, creating a makeshift shelter beside the vehicle. His movements were efficient, practiced. The actions of someone who'd faced similar situations before. "You've done this before," she observed, helping him secure one corner of the tarp against the wind. "More times than I'd like to count," he replied. "Mountain rescues don't always go according to plan." As darkness fell, they huddled under the tarp with a small camping stove, providing both heat and light. The storm raged around them, turning the mountain into a hostile wilderness that bore no resemblance to the scenic drive Kate had imagined. She pulled the emergency blanket tighter around her shoulders, acutely aware of how unprepared she was for this kind of survival situation. Her designer clothes and corporate confidence meant nothing here. Only Alex's knowledge and experience stood between them and serious danger. "Tell me about Zoe," she said, needing to fill the silence with something other than rain and wind. Alex's expression softened at his daughter's name, the harsh lines around his eyes relaxing slightly. "She's 7, he said quietly. "Smart as a whip, but the world's too loud for her sometimes. Crowds, sudden noises, changes in routine, they overwhelm her." His hands cradled the warm mug of instant coffee, steam rising in the cold air. "I quit the fire department when Sarah died. Zoe needed stability, someone who'd always be there." Kate felt something shift in her chest, an unfamiliar sensation that might have been respect, or perhaps something deeper. "That must have been difficult," she said. "Giving up your career." Alex shrugged, but she caught the flash of pain in his eyes. "Some things are more important than career," he said simply. "Zoe's world fell apart when she lost her mom. I couldn't let it fall apart again." The rain continued its relentless assault on their shelter, but inside their small circle of warmth, Kate found herself seeing Alex Crawford as more than the simple carpenter she'd dismissed. A child's cry pierced through the storm, faint but unmistakable. Both Alex and Kate froze, listening intently. The sound came again, thin, frightened, calling for Daddy through the wind and rain. "Did you hear that?" Kate asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alex was already moving, grabbing the flashlight and shrugging into his jacket. "Someone's out there," he said, his training taking over. "A kid, alone in this weather." Without hesitation, he stepped out into the storm, leaving Kate sitting beside the dying warmth of their small camp. The beam of Alex's flashlight cut through the darkness like a sword, revealing nothing but rain and trees. Kate grabbed the second flashlight and followed him, her inadequate shoes slipping on the wet ground. They moved deeper into the forest, following the intermittent cries that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Branches whipped against Kate's face, soaking her hair and streaming water down her collar. "Tyler!" The child's voice called out again, closer now. "Daddy, where are you?" They found him 20 minutes later, a boy no older than 6, huddled against a massive Douglas fir with his knees drawn up to his chest. His clothes were soaked through, his lips blue with cold, his eyes wide with terror and exhaustion. "Hey there, buddy," Alex said, his voice gentle despite the urgency of the situation. He knelt beside the boy, making himself less threatening. "I'm Alex." "What's your name?" The child looked up with eyes that seemed too old for his face. "Tyler," he whispered through chattering teeth. "I can't find my daddy." Kate watched Alex work with the frightened child, his movements careful and non-threatening. He wrapped Tyler in his own jacket, checking for injuries with practiced efficiency. "How long have you been out here, Tyler?" he asked. The boy's answer made Kate's blood run cold. "Since this morning," Tyler said. "Daddy went to find the trail back to our camp, but he never came back. I waited and waited, but it got dark and scary. 24 hours alone in the wilderness. Even Kate knew how dangerous that was, especially for a child. "My daddy's hurt," Tyler continued, his small voice breaking. "He fell down the hill trying to get help." I heard him calling, but then he stopped. Alex and Kate exchanged glances over the boy's head. If Tyler's father was injured and trapped somewhere in this terrain, time was running out. The storm was getting worse, and hypothermia would claim anyone exposed to these conditions for much longer. Alex stood up, his decision already made. "We need to find his father," he said to Kate. "Tonight." Kate's first instinct was to protest. They barely had enough supplies for themselves, and searching for a missing person in a storm seemed like suicide. But looking at Tyler's terrified face, she found herself nodding. "What do we need to do?" she asked. Alex began gathering their supplies, his movements swift and purposeful. "We stick together, follow Tyler's directions as best we can, and hope we get lucky," he said. "This is exactly the kind of situation where people die trying to be heroes." His words should have been discouraging, but somehow they made Kate feel safer. At least one of them understood the risks they were taking. They moved through the forest like a small army, Alex leading with Tyler bundled in his arms, Kate bringing up the rear with their emergency supplies. The boy directed them toward a steep ravine where he remembered hearing his father's voice. Kate's city shoes provided almost no traction on the slippery ground, but she pressed forward, driven by something she didn't fully understand. Maybe it was Tyler's obvious need, or maybe it was the way Alex carried the responsibility of 3 lives without complaint. At the edge of the ravine, Alex's flashlight beam found what they were looking for. 15 feet below, a man lay motionless against a fallen log, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. "Mark!" Tyler cried out. "Daddy!" The man's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his son's voice, and Kate felt a surge of relief that he was conscious. But getting him out of that ravine in the middle of a storm would require every skill Alex possessed, and probably some luck besides. Alex studied the situation with the same methodical approach he'd used during the fire. He pulled a coil of rope from their supplies rope that Kate hadn't even noticed he'd packed. "I'm going down," he told Kate. "You hold the rope. Let it out slowly when I tell you." "Think you can handle that?" Kate looked at the rope in her hands, then down at the injured man below. If she made a mistake, Alex could fall. If she let the rope slip, both men could die. But Tyler was counting on them, and there was no one else. "I can do it," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Alex secured the rope around a sturdy tree, then around his waist in a harness configuration that spoke of extensive training. "When I call up, you let out rope slowly," he instructed. "If I yell stop, you lock it off immediately. If something goes wrong, don't try to be a hero, get Tyler somewhere safe and wait for help." With that, he disappeared over the edge of the ravine, leaving Kate holding a rope that connected her to 2 lives. The descent seemed to take forever. Kate's hands burned from gripping the rope, her arms ached from controlling Alex's weight, and sweat mingled with rain on her face despite the cold. Tyler sat nearby, wrapped in an emergency blanket, watching with the intense focus of a child who understood that everything depended on the adults getting this right. "Okay," Alex's voice called from below. "Send the rope back down." Kate reversed the process, feeding the rope down so Alex could secure the injured man for the journey up. pulling two grown men up a 15-foot ravine in a storm tested every muscle Kate didn't know she had. Her designer clothes were ruined, her manicured nails were broken and bleeding, and her expensive hairstyle had devolved into wet tangles. But with each foot of progress, with each successful tug on that rope, she felt something she'd never experienced in any corporate boardroom. She felt necessary in a way that had nothing to do with profit margins or market share, and everything to do with simple human survival. When Alex finally helped Mark over the edge of the ravine, Kate collapsed beside them, her chest heaving with exhaustion. Mark's leg was clearly broken, but he was conscious and coherent. More importantly, Tyler was no longer alone in the wilderness. The family was reunited, even if they were still far from safe. Alex fashioned a splint from fallen branches and rope, his medical training evident in every movement. "We need to get back to shelter," he said. "Mark needs warmth and medical attention." The journey back to their makeshift camp took twice as long with an injured man, but they made it. Alex used his emergency radio to call for help once they were back in the truck, and within an hour they could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors cutting through the storm. Tyler rode with his father to the hospital, both of them looking back to wave goodbye to the strangers who had risked everything to save them. As the helicopter disappeared into the stormy night, Kate realized that she'd completely forgotten about her meeting in Portland. "I probably just lost $100 million deal," she said, watching the aircraft's lights fade into the darkness. Alex looked at her with something that might have been understanding. "Do you regret it?" he asked. Kate thought about Tyler's terrified face, about Mark's grateful tears when he saw his son safe, about the feeling of that rope in her hands connecting her to something larger than herself. "No," she said, and meant it. "I don't regret it at all." For the first time in years, she'd been part of something that mattered more than money. 3 months later, Kate stood in Alex's workshop, watching him put the finishing touches on a handcrafted dining table. The space smelled of wood shavings and mineral oil, filled with the evidence of skilled craftsmanship. She'd sold Cascade Hotels to her management team for far less than it was worth, but they'd earned the right to run it their way. With the proceeds, she'd bought the land next to the reconstructed bridge and begun work on something entirely different, a training center for hospitality skills that would serve the young people of mountain communities. "The tables will be ready by next week," Alex said, running his hand along the smooth surface of the wood. "Local pine, just like you requested." Kate nodded, but she wasn't really thinking about furniture. She was thinking about the woman she'd been 3 months ago, so certain of what mattered, so wrong about what was truly valuable. That woman would never have understood why Kate was now living in a small apartment on Main Street, working with her hands instead of commanding from a corner office. Zoe Crawford emerged from the house, carrying a complex Lego construction that looked like the Empire State Building. She approached Kate with the careful deliberation that marked all her interactions, but without the wariness that had characterized their first meeting. "I finished it," she announced, holding up her creation. "Want to see how the elevator works?" Kate knelt down to Zoe's level, genuinely fascinated by the intricate, mechanical details the child had incorporated. "That's amazing," she said. "Can you teach me how you made the pulley system?" For the next hour, Kate sat cross-legged on Alex's living room floor, learning engineering principles from a 7-year-old who saw the world in patterns and systems that most adults missed entirely. Alex watched from the kitchen, where he was preparing lunch, and Kate caught him smiling at the sight of his daughter patiently explaining gear ratios to a former CEO. When Zoe finally deemed Kate competent to help with the next project, she handed over a small red Lego heart. "For remembering," she said simply. As the sun set behind the mountains that had once seemed like obstacles but now felt like home, Kate realized that sometimes the most important journeys began with the destinations we never planned to reach. Her phone buzzed with a text from her former assistant. The Portland investors had found another deal. The corporate world had moved on without her, and none of it seemed to matter anymore. What mattered was the weight of a Lego heart in her pocket, the sound of Zoe's laughter from the next room, and the quiet presence of a man who'd shown her what courage really looked like. Tyler and his father Mark stopped by on their way home from physical therapy, Mark's leg healing well from the surgery that had repaired his mountain injuries. Tyler ran straight to Zoe, eager to show her a new rock collection he'd started, while Mark shook hands with Alex and Kate. "Still can't believe what you two did that night," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Tyler talks about it constantly, how the lady in fancy clothes helped pull Daddy out of the hole." Kate smiled at the description, remembering her ruined Armani suit and broken nails. "We all did what we had to do," she said, but Mark shook his head. "No," he replied firmly. "You did what most people only hope they'd be brave enough to do." As father and son drove away, Kate found herself standing beside Alex in comfortable silence, watching their neighbors disappear down the mountain road. "Any regrets?" Alex asked, echoing the question from that stormy night 3 months ago. Kate looked at the workshop where she'd learned to work with wood, at the house where she'd learned to work with children, at the man who'd taught her that some things were more valuable than success. "Just one," she said, and Alex raised an eyebrow in question. Kate smiled, pulling the Lego heart from her pocket and holding it up to catch the last rays of sunlight. "I regret that it took a fire and a storm and a lost child to show me what I was really looking for." Alex moved closer, his shoulder brushing against hers as they watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the best things are worth waiting for, even when we don't know we're waiting." In the distance, the lights of Ridgemont began to twinkle like earthbound stars, and Kate Crawford, no longer Blackwell, no longer CEO of anything except her own small piece of happiness, finally understood that coming home didn't always mean returning to where you started. Sometimes it meant finding the place where you belonged, even if that place had been waiting for you in a small mountain town, in the steady hands of a single father who knew that the most heroic thing you could do was simply stay when someone needed you. The mountain wind carried the scent of pine and possibility, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Kate looked forward to tomorrow, not because of what she might achieve, but because of who she might become. In her pocket, Tyler's Lego heart felt as heavy and precious as any corporate award she'd ever earned. A reminder that the most valuable things in life couldn't be measured in dollars or market share, but in the quiet moments when we choose to be present for the people who need us most.